Hello Fischer fans, welcome back to the series of my 60 memorable games by Robert James Fischer, and in this video I'll walk you through his game number 10 in the book. Since we are doing game number 10, so it makes perfect sense to wear the shirt of Lionel Messi for this video. So Bobby Fischer is only 16 years old and he's playing against a very strong German grandmaster Wolfgang Unzicker. And the title to this game in the book is Milking the Cow, and we'll see that happening in the game, how Bobby Fischer very normally plays the opening and then very normally tries to transition into a middle game and then an end game, but somehow out of thin air he just milks out this advantage for himself, wins a pawn against Unzicker, and then never lets him get back into the game. So without wasting any time, let's dive right into it. So the game starts with an e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5, which is Bobby Fischer's favorite Ruy Lopez opening, also called the Spanish opening. a6, dropping the bishop back to a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop to b3, d6, c3, castles, h3, and the idea is to stop the bishop to coming to g4, knight to h5, dropping the bishop back to c2, and now c5, gaining a lot of space on the queen side. But Bobby Fischer strikes in the center with d4. Queen to c7, knight to d2, knight is headed towards that journey, which is very typical in the Ruy Lopez, trying to go for that f5 square. Bishop to d7, knight to f1, rook to e8, and now knight to e3, g6, trying to control the very crucial light squares on the king side, f5 and h5, and bishop would like to fianchetto manually by f8 and g7. So it's really important to play g6 in this position. Fischer takes on e5 and d takes on e5. Now Fischer goes knight to h2. He wants to play the knight to g4, try to trade some pieces on the king side, and Unzicker actually plays rook to d8, and now queen to f3, bishop to e6, knight to g4, knight takes knight, and now pawn takes knight. So the game is exactly like game 6 in the book against Chakran, and Fischer's idea is to play g5, sacrifice that pawn for the attack. So queen to c6, and now g5. And just like Chakran, Unzicker also goes knight c4 and does not take the pawn, because if you take the pawn, you would first of all think like, Bobby Fischer is offering me a free pawn, definitely I should not take it. Because Fischer was, famous for his preparation. He would just prepare these opening lines very deeply, very heavily, and set up these ideas and traps for his opponents. So you would never want to fall into Fischer's preparation, because here Fischer had prepared knight d5 and now attacking the bishop. So bishop has to take on c1, but now Fischer has this in-between move, knight to f6 check, king to h8, and now you would just take the bishop. After you save the rook, queen g3, queen is headed to h4 with an attack on the h file with g3, king g2, rook h1. So these kind of moves. So Bobby Fischer loved to play attacking chess, loved to sacrifice pawns and pieces in order to get initiative, in order to get activity, in order to get an attack on the opponent king. So that's what Fischer wanted, and Unzicker said no. Knight to c4, and now Fischer jumps his knight to g4 square. Knight is ready to hop into these juicy dark squares. Now they are under control because of the pawn on g5. So Unzicker cannot let that knight have a lot of fun on the king side. So he takes on g4, queen takes on g4, and now f6. It's a mistake because now Fischer gets the opportunity to take the pawn on f6. Bishop takes on f6, and now this pawn is a little isolated and could be weak, so Fischer would try to target that pawn. So first of all, Fischer tries to address some of the matters on the queen side and goes a4, knight back to b6, takes, and bishop to e3, developing that bishop, rook to a8, and now improves the rook to d1. And now king to h8, because this diagonal is open, so later in the game, Fischer would just have these checks on the diagonal. So Unzicker thought that h8 is much safer for the king to be at, so he goes king h8. And now Fischer just very beautifully goes b3, taking control of the a4 and c4 squares, so kind of restricting that knight and not allowing the knight to jump back into the queen side light squares. So bishop to g7, queen h4, bishop f6, and now Fischer is happy to trade the dark square bishop. So bishop g5 takes on g5, queen takes g5, rook takes on a1, and now rook takes on a1. So we are kind of walking right through the middle game where it's more or less equal, but we'll see how Bobby Fischer demonstrates this idea of milking the cow, he just milks this advantage out of thin air in this position. So first of all, after knight to d7, Unzicker thought that he wants to. His knight is not doing anything on b6, and he's not ready to jump into these light squares. So he goes back to d7. Might want to play knight to f6. So Fischer here plays a beautiful move. As Unzicker tries to improve his knight, Fischer also wants to improve his bishop. And bishop right now is not doing all that much. It's just blocked by his own pawns on e4 and b3, so he tries to develop it to a better square, which would be f3 or g4. So he goes bishop d1 immediately and takes advantage of the fact that Unzicker cannot take this pawn, because then he would just play bishop to f3, and if, let's say, queen f4 trying to exchange queens, then Fischer has this bishop c6, not only trying to get the pawn back, but really trying to win that knight. Because if you go rook to e7, then there is rook a8 check, king g7, and then rook h7 guarantees a winning position to white. So bishop d1 is a very smart move in this position. Unzicker goes knight f6, and now Fischer improves the rook to a7. So here Unzicker just has nothing much to do, and he plays a very innocent looking queen d6 move. I mean, he's just trying to improve the position of the queen by attacking the bishop, and he thought that what can go wrong? He's just attacking the bishop. Fischer would save the bishop, and then he would just maybe move the queen somewhere else again. But here's a problem. Fischer goes bishop to e2, probably the best move of the game so far. Just very simple, very subtle, very solid, with a very deep idea. He's trying to attack the pawn on b5, but there is no good way for Unzicker to defend the pawn on b5. Okay, you might start thinking that what if rook b8 and I'm just defending the pawn? But no, then the Fischer's rook is infiltrating to the f7 square, hitting the knight, and the best move by the engine is knight to g8, but then rook to d7, hitting the queen, queen e6, and then rook to d5. Rook gets a very nice spot on the d5 square. The bishop is also coming to g4, and black's pieces are pushed back, and they're very passive, and Fischer would enjoy this position a lot. So how to defend the pawn? The best move by the engine that is given is c4, and if c4 is played, then Fischer would probably take on c4, but here Unzicker had to find this beautiful queen b6 move, which is the top engine recommendation. But here Bobby Fischer would have definitely played c5, sacrificing the rook for the attack, because now you just take the knight with check, king g8, and bishop takes on b5 with an attack on the rook. And if, let's say, rook to f8, then bishop to c4 check, and you have to give back the material, and then Fischer would have a very pleasing and very conveniently winning position from that point. So Unzicker is in trouble. He cannot find any of these good moves. So bishop e2, simply attacking the pawn, and Unzicker is helpless. So he tries to exchange the rooks here and tries to fight against very active rook on a7. So Fischer is now happy to take and exchange rooks, because now he's a pawn up. He takes on b5, king g7, and now it's a matter of technique for the great Bobby Fischer, how to win this position when you're a pawn up. So he drops the bishop first of all back to e2, queen to c7, drops the queen back to e3, queen a5, and now g3. He wants to play king g2 so that king is closer to the center in the endgame. Queen a3 attacking b3 pawn, king g2, and here he goes back queen a5. So what happens if he now takes the pawn on b3? Well, in this position, Bobby Fischer, of course, will just take the pawn on c5 and get a clear passer. So Unzicker cannot let that happen. So he goes back, to kind of defend the pawn on c5. But Fischer now takes advantage of these light squares and tries to exchange queens, as it is the simple principle. If you're ahead in the material, if you have more material, you should try to exchange more pieces and try to simplify the position so that you can convert that really easily without giving your opponent any counterplay. So bishop d3, queen goes back to b6, and now b4, Unzicker takes, and now Fischer takes back on b4, knight g4, and now queen to c5, trying to exchange queens. After the exchange of queens, Bobby Fischer just gets his pawns going on the king side rolling, and then he gets the bishop to c4 with a check, and king to e7. And in this position, Bobby Fischer played c6. Dash pawns must be pushed. Knight goes back very passive to e8, and now Fischer takes a pawn on e5. Unzicker plays h6, king to e3, knight c7, king d4, after h5, king back to e3, and I mean g5, bishop e2, takes on h5, and very simple, king to f4, trying to go for that pawn, and after king d8, Fischer attacks the knight goes to g7. Now Fischer wins that pawn, so he's like 3 pawns up, but now 2 pawns up, but it's still a winning position. This pawn, the king is going to go to f6, attack the knight. Knight is kind of trapped, and king will be facilitating the pawn to become another queen. So it's a very definitely winning position for white. So in this position, Wolfgang Unzicker decided to resign. He had enough. So a beautiful game by Bobby Fischer, almost without any mistake. There were some inaccuracies, but those were some interesting ideas by Fischer that he had prepared. And it's really hard to decode Fischer's preparation. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be coming up with game 11 very soon. See you guys later. Hope you guys liked the video, and share it, comment, and I respect your comments a lot. And whatever you guys comment, I'll try to bring those improvements into my video. See you guys later.